you within the last 5 years have somebody that you cared about die? How many of you have had a pet die? How many of you have gotten a ticket? All of those are losses in one way or another. How many of you have had a health challenge? Okay, so you have lost a sense of being really healthy. So tonight we're talking about loss, what it means. We're talking about a little bit about how to recover from it. And we're talking about a loss that is ugly for many people, and that's suicide. And they don't understand it. But we've got some really interesting information about suicide. Let's go. As I was asking those questions, the bottom line is everybody on this planet experiences loss, but it depends how you identify loss. And what we find is that when you do large sample studies, you ask 5,000 people, what's the first thing you think of when you hear the word loss? What do they say?
Death.
Death, without exception. How many people have lost 5 people in the last 5 years to death? Anybody? Okay, we got 3. How many? 4? 3? 2? 1? Okay, 1 in 5 years. I'm not minimizing that, but that's 1 in 5 years. We have losses every single day. I had something on the freeway the other day on my way back from Southern California. It was dark. Thank heavens I'd had some Delta E. There was, highway work all over the place, and I hit something, blew out the 2 front tires. 10 o'clock at night. Thank heavens for cell phones. Thank heavens for AAA.
Thank heavens you could drive to safety.
Exactly. I pulled off. I figured the tires were already shot. I'm just pulling off the exit. That was a loss. I finally got where I needed to go at 1 o'clock in the morning safely. And the next morning I had to interfere with my trip because I had to go to Costco and buy 2 new tires. Only he told me that I couldn't rotate the tires if I only bought 2. So I had to buy 4 new tires and was really glad that it all worked out. It's a loss. But we don't always think about that. So it's really important to avoid defining loss too narrowly. Because if you do that, there'll be lots of stuff you won't grieve. Loss is not simple. When somebody dies, it's way more than a funeral. Researchers say that loss has what we call multiple dimensions. And you can go on my website and you can get these slides. So if you learn better taking notes, take notes, but you can get them. Mental, emotional, physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, ecclesiastical, theological, philosophical, and we could go on. And when I first started looking for the latest research on suicide, it was because of an ecclesiastical incident. A family had their 17-year-old son commit suicide. Went to their ecclesiastical leaders to arrange for the funeral. And they were told matter-of-factly that they could have the funeral, but it couldn't be in the church, and he sure was not going to be buried in their church cemetery because, after all, he'd killed himself, so he broke the 6th commandment. Okay, that was harder on the family, or as hard as the actual death. Yep. So the dimensions are huge. So what is loss? You can define it lots of different ways. Simply, it's the state of being deprived of something you once had, like a 17-year-old son. Or it's something you thought you had. You thought somebody loved you a lot, And then guess what? You turned around, they'd taken off with somebody else. You thought you had it, but apparently you didn't. Or something that you want very badly. When I was 15, I told my parents I wanted to be a doctor. My mother laughed and told me that I wasn't smart enough. And I believed her. Because our family script had no females as doctors. In 15 generations that we can go back, only 2 people have ever become physicians in our family line. And they were both male. So she wanted me to go to college, but doctor? No, that's way outside the script. So what did you want to do that you couldn't get to do? The thing we have to stop doing is taking other people's perception of our brain as a reality, because you're the only one who knows your brain. And you're the only person who's going to be with you for the rest of your life. So I'm perfectly happy for input, but it's my brain and my life. And I waited 40 years to go back to school because my mom said she didn't think I was smart enough. Now that was a waste of time. You can sometimes touch the loss if it's been a person. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's very abstract, like I want to be a doctor. Oh, I don't think you're smart enough. That's an abstract concept. Sometimes it can be repaired. My brother had a favorite teddy bear. It had buttons for eyes. Remember, we're talking the late 1800s. And he lost it when the teddy bear lost an eye. Well, my mother just found a button and sewed it on, and then he lost it again because the eyes didn't match. One was brown and one was blue. So she had to put 2 green ones on. But sometimes you can fix it and sometimes you can't. What you must be able to do is identify the loss, be able to describe it, because until you can identify, label, and describe it, you can't deal with it. Because the brain doesn't know what it is you're trying to deal with. So you have to be very specific. It's easy sometimes if someone's died, although sometimes when people die, yes, it's a loss in a sense, but it's also a bigger benefit. Because sometimes their quality of life is horrible. And it's been really painful for you to deal with that. And sometimes they've been a pain in the patootie. Really hard for you to deal with. So it's not that you wish them gone, but there's always a gift when you lose something, if you look for it. And sometimes the gift is, I don't have to do that anymore. What a relief. It's sad, but it's also a relief. And you need to be honest enough to look at both sides. What are some losses? These are just a few of them. You don't meet expectations. Natural disasters. 2014 in Napa, we had an earthquake. 2017, we had fires. I'm very, very fortunate that my house is still standing. But I had to evacuate for 2 weeks because the smoke was so bad. Then when I came back, guess what everything smells like? Smoke. A loss of a body part. Have a mastectomy. Have a prostatectomy. You've lost a body part. Part of that may be a good thing, but it's still a loss. People coming back from the wars really can struggle with that. Come back without a leg or an arm, or a leg and an arm. As we get older, failing sensory perception. Last time we talked about dehydration, and I gave you the statistics that over the age of 55, most people are dehydrated. And one of the contributors to that is what? What do you start to lose as we get older?
Thirst.
The thirst sensation, absolutely. So you have to drink to a program, not drink to thirst. Because by the time you're thirsty, if you're over 55, you're already dehydrated. Your brain tissue is already pulling away from your skull. And those are things we have to pay attention to. Sometimes people get quite elderly and they don't feel like eating because their sense of smell isn't as good. I look at them and say, eat anyway. Remember what it smelled like. So you want something very badly, you want a new house, and you come right down to signing on the dotted line and everything falls through. You don't think you have any options. You always have options, always. You just have to look for them. Getting laid off or fired or going bankrupt, those are all losses. They happen to many people. Can't get pregnant, or you have 3 sets of triplets. Miscarriages, fetal demises. I mean, those are all significant losses, and it depends how the person deals with it. My dad was a preacher, some of you know that. Talk about left at the altar. I was playing the organ one time for a wedding that he was supposed to perform, and after about 40 minutes of playing the prelude stuff over and over again, and looking around for the bride, someone came out and said to me, go ahead and stop playing, I have an announcement. I said, okay. The announcement was the bride had taken off with the best man. Wasn't showing up for the wedding, so we had the reception anyway. We told the groom, this is very lucky. Isn't it better that you know now than a month after you've gotten married? Well, he allowed us, maybe there was something to that. Now, I think he actually enjoyed the reception. So on. So look through your life. Some losses at the moment are very big. But in the long-range theme of things, it's probably not those big losses that really hit you hardest. It's the accumulation of all the little losses. Here's the bad news. If you do not identify, label, describe, and recover from losses, you will develop what we call a slush fund in the brain. And it will be all of the emotional energy related to those unresolved losses that are banging around inside your head. And then what happens is sometimes a really small thing will happen. You know, you drop your favorite antique cut glass bowl that your great-grandmother left you, and you go to pieces. It's a thing. Nobody's hurt. It's too bad, but it's not worth this. And then you realize it's got nothing to do with the bowl. The bowl was that last loss that tipped this slush fund over the edge. And like Niagara Falls, everything started pouring out. And this often happens to men. It'll happen to females too, but it'll often happen to men because they don't particularly like to process emotional information aloud. And it's got to be processed. I mean, you guys, if you got to go lock yourself in a room and talk out loud, do so, because you have to get it out. If not, you're at high risk for the accumulated loss. But the good news is, lots of research, we know how to recover. I recommend that you do a loss line. In fact, in large sample studies, it is one of the proven strategies for dealing with loss. So it's really easy to do. It can be simple. You can do it on a piece of paper. You can do it on the computer. And it basically is I start writing in the middle. I write the date and the loss. And you better give yourself a little space before you start that, because some of your losses might have started before you were born. Your mother got pregnant, but your father was killed over in Afghanistan. Something like that. That's a loss that occurred long before she got pregnant. Or, in my case, my mother did not have a happy childhood. She was left twice in an orphanage. She wasn't excited about having a child because her childhood hadn't been happy. So finally, when my dad talked her into it, she said, okay, I'll do it. I only want to do it once. I'm going to have a boy. It's going to be born on your birthday. Obviously, she was not a nurse. She forgot to tell me. Not a boy. And I wasn't born on his birthday. I was 5 days late. Okay, there's 2 losses right there. Because I grew up with her, I think, joking. Didn't think it was a joke when I was little. But my dad would have his birthday on January 26th, and she'd make him a birthday cake. And my birthday would come along February 1st, and she'd look at me and she'd go, why couldn't you have been born on January 26th? Because we could have had one cake due for both of you. Okay, I think she was joking. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. When I was 5, I didn't think she was joking. So, date, loss, I start out with, whatever year it was. And I wasn't a boy. It was my first loss. Underneath, on the bottom, I'll put the things that gave me some negative consequences about that. I felt less than for a lot of years because I didn't meet expectations. And she had postpartum depression for 4 months. Her older sister said she was so distraught at not having a son and having to try to do this again that she went into postpartum depression for 4 months. Poor woman, really. The positive was that my dad took care of me for 4 months. Because she was just lying in bed in, real horrible baby blues, they used to call it. Most kids, most little girls, didn't get that kind of time with their father. So there was a gift for me, although it took me a while to understand it. And then you just keep writing it out. And after you get your list done, make sure you have some extra pages because you're going to have more losses. It's a given. And then at the very bottom, did you grieve that loss and recover from it? Yes or no? And you see how many Y's you have and how many N's you have. And now you know what you need to work on. All right, so that's loss. What's grief? Grief can be defined as intense mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, social, ecclesiastical, theological, you name it, all those variations. And the suffering that results. Actual pain, physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, social pain, ecclesiastical pain. Loss of any type will give you some of those. And as I mentioned earlier, conflicting feelings. I remember when my mother died. It was sad. But I'm telling you, my first thought was, oh, neither one of us have to do this anymore. Because her quality of life was really bad, and I could never do enough for her. But if you don't understand this, you can feel really guilty about that. How in the world do I feel relief? She's dead. I know, that's why I feel relief. Didn't wish her dead, but there's the gift. Because her life wasn't happy, and because she was so unhappy, that was stressful for me. And so on. People try to deal with loss very differently, this process of grief. Often when you see parents and little kids, they'll lose something and the parent will rush to replace it. You can't ever replace a loss. My favorite story is about the 5-year-old who wanted to, clean the water in his little goldfish bowl. His mother explained to him she needed to help him do that, and here's the little net that she would lift the fish out with and put it in another clean bowl of water while you clean this one out. Well, he was 5, eldest child, think we can do anything, everything. So he decided to clean the fish bowl while she was doing something else. And he remembered that when she put something dirty down the sink, she turned on the disposal. So he turns on the disposal, tips the bowl over, puts his little hand in front of it, but the fish found it easy to find his way around his fingers and went down the garbage disposal. When he realized what had happened, he threw a fit. His mother comes in and says, instead of, well, we need to remember the happy things about the fish, whose name happened to be Slippery. Should have been a clue. She says, oh, get your coat on, we'll go down to the pet store and buy another fish. Okay, she's just teaching him that you can replace a loss. You can buy another fish, you can name him Slippery number 2, but you can't replace him. And when kids learn that, it's difficult for them to go through the grief recovery process when you can't replace something, even though you try. A lot of people create a lot of unnecessary drama. A lot of family drama, especially at funerals. Create messes that now you have to clean up the mess in addition. Some people just try to stuff it, which prevents the grieving process. Some people develop addictive behaviors to try to make themselves feel better. But addictive behaviors have their own negative consequences that in the end will make you feel worse. And a few commit suicide because their brain's in an altered state, and we'll talk about that. Some people get stuck in one of the 3 protective emotions, anger, fear, or sadness, which can become a habit. And when it becomes a habit, then you never get back to joy. And the brain, according to many researchers, is actually hardwired for happiness. But we get stuck in the protective emotions. Some people actually look for the gift and are grateful for a piece of it, even though they're grieving another piece. Some of them use their experience to help others. And some even create something to honor the person who died, if that was the particular type of loss. Problem is that in our culture, we teach people how to get things, how to acquire things. We don't teach them how to lose things. And we're all going to be losing things, but we haven't learned how to do that. The way you handle grief is likely predicated on how you watch the adults in your family growing up deal with grief. And if they were skilled in dealing with it and helped you learn to do that, fabulous. If they weren't, you're on your own. Take a look at how you cope with loss. How do you go through the grieving process? Sometimes people do this poorly because they have very low emotional intelligence, low EQ. Low EQ tends to immediately want to blame somebody else for anything that happens that's painful, to kind of displace some of the discomfort you feel. I like to talk about Jot behaviors, jumping to conclusions, overreacting, and taking things personally. If you have a lot of Jot behaviors in your life, you're going to have trouble going through the grieving process because there's nobody to blame. You just go through the process. And some people don't seem to have developed the skill of understanding that life is a little bit like a roller coaster. There's wonderful times and there's times that are a little stressful, but then there will be wonderful times again because that's the cycle of life. And if you can't do that, you act like, feel like, think like this is the end. There's no hope. So what is recovery? Recovery is also very simple. It's simply the process of learning to feel better after you have experienced a loss. It is possible to do so. It allows you to remember the loss, to recall anything you want to about the person, the thing, the event, and it gradually becomes just a fact of your history. And it no longer has the sting, and that's the goal. You want to avoid forgetting. I mean, goodness. My maternal grandmother was one of the most important people in my entire life. I would not want to forget her in any sense of the word. But I can tell you stories about her. She had some wonderful sayings that I occasionally use, one of which was, "You can't fix stupid." My mother did not like that. And I remember her one time saying, "Mom, we don't use that word in our family." And my grandma says, "Well, you still can't fix stupid." And she said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean there's a brain that has a lot of potential and they're not using any of it in a positive way." She went, "Oh." So you want to remember, but you want to avoid the pain that comes with that. So I can talk about pretty much anything now that's happened in my life, and I don't feel any sting. You know, some things I regret, some things have turned out to be a whole lot better. Either way, no pain. Sadness is the emotion, the appropriate emotion, that not only tells you, hey, wait a minute, you've experienced a loss here, but gives you the energy to grieve and recover. And if you cannot get to sadness, you're going to have a tough time recovering. So we have some male-female differences. Some of you have seen this before. This is the emotion staircase. And you can see joy right there. Euphoria is a step above joy. But it's not an emotion in and of itself, as you may remember. It is just a brief episode of intense joy. Your brain was not designed to live at euphoria. And people who try to do that burn out, especially if they're trying to get there using drugs. You know, the average age for a hardcore addict who is trying to feel better is like 37 years old. Okay, that's about a fourth as long as I want to live. Males tend to stop at anger. They go down one step to anger and stay stuck there because they don't know how to go through recovery. Don't want to talk about it. You know, they go out and act it out. You know, kick the cat, slap the kid, crash the car. You know, do something that's, you know, demonstrating how badly they feel, but it's going to end up hurting them and their family. Females tend, when there's a loss, to go straight down to sadness. That is the appropriate emotion, but it's easy for them to get stuck there and not know how to climb back up to joy. And this is what we see in relationships. You know, husband and wife have something really horrible happen, you know, the house burns down, one of the children dies, he loses his job, whatever. And he stops at anger and is really ticked. And she goes clear down to sadness, and they're poles apart, and they don't understand what's going on with each other. And they're at high risk for breaking up the relationship if they don't understand this. Females are more likely to have a social network, a support group. When you do large sample studies in the United States, it turns out that the average female can name 9 people in her life that she could talk to or get some support from during a loss. They polled males. How many people does the average male have as a support system?
2 or 3.
2 or 3?
4. Maybe
4, 1.
none.
Some have none. Some have 1, and that person is his wife. So if she dies, or if she leaves him, or he leaves her, what does that leave him with for a support group? 0. And this is a process. It's really hard to do this alone. And especially if it's a couple and they're not helping each other grieve. So men, your task, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to get yourself a couple of people, a couple of buddies that you can do things with that can help you when something hits you hard. Women, you probably already got that covered, but I would suggest that you look carefully at the group of people around you. Are they the kind of people that when push comes to shove are really going to give you some emotional support? Or are they going to disappear as soon as something bad happens to you? So look carefully. Females tend to have a grieving style that's very different from males. It's usually verbal and it's experience oriented. They're talking to their support group about how they feel and what their experience is like. Men have a goal-oriented grieving style, which means I want to fix it. The male has a fix-it brain. I want to fix this and get it over with. And when they can't fix the loss, they can get very depressed, discouraged, angry, and they may never recover. Women think if they're talking about it enough, that'll do it. No, talking about it is important, but it's only part of the process. You can get stuck rehearsing. You can become addicted to rehearsing. Because as you keep rehearsing this, you pump adrenaline, and as adrenaline goes up, so does dopamine. So you feel better. You're exhausting the people around you that have heard it 79 times. But you feel better. But it's easy to get addicted to that and never recover. And then we've mentioned that males are more likely to go out and do something. And especially if they're upset. They'll go out and do something, and often to their detriment. Females have been socialized from babyhood in a way to be rewarded for tears. You know, on the playground, 2 little kids will fall, a boy and a girl, and everybody rushes to the little girl and says, "Oh, it's okay, honey, go ahead and cry. You know, you'll feel better later." And they look at the little boy and say, "What's wrong, bud? Buck up. It wasn't that bad." And he better not cry or he's going to be in worse trouble. And this can carry right on through adulthood, unfortunately. So that males are less comfortable saying, you know, that was really tough. I've heard of people getting fired before, but this is my first experience and it hurts. You know, you are actually able to articulate that, men. And that helps to get it out in front of you. But when you don't, then you can get really irritable, which actually is the way that males exhibit depression. Very differently from female. They don't sit in the corner and cry and suck their thumb. They get irritable. So if there's been a loss and the men in your family or your male friends are getting irritable, know that they're depressed. Because that's one reason that researchers believe that 10, 20 times as many women were depressed as males, because they were evaluating all the males by the symptoms that females exhibit when they're depressed. And it's not the same thing. Females tend to blame themselves. Sometimes they may have contributed to it, sometimes they may not have. But they tend to blame themselves. They put everything internally. Whereas males do the opposite. They'll blame somebody else. It wasn't me, it was his fault. You know, that happened to me the other day. I got so tickled. We were in a committee and we were discussing a rather large project. And one of the men had made a unilateral decision, which turned out to be not so good. So we were discussing this, about how we could fix this. He looks at me and he says, "Dr. Taylor, I'm blaming you for this." I said, I wasn't even here when that happened. I'm not picking up blame. If I did something, I'll accept that piece, but I didn't in this case. He says, "I don't care whether they did or not, I'm just blaming you." Made him feel a lot better. Made him really irritated when I wouldn't pick it up. Only apologize for what you do. And it's natural for people, women do it too, it's not just men, but I think probably men are a little bit more likely to blame, based on the research, somebody else, and women are more likely to blame themselves, whether they had anything to do with it or not. Go to the airport. Just watch for a little bit. I was walking out the door, a woman was coming in, and she said, "Oh, excuse me." And I'm thinking, for what? And I looked at her and I said, "Excuse you for what?" Well, she said, "I don't know." I said, "I don't know either." We're so socialized to say, "I'm sorry, excuse me." I mean, you got as much right to come in as I do to go out. There's no apology needed here. And she looked at me like I was from another planet. One of the ways women often exhibit grief is to work really hard to take care of other people, and they don't take good care of themselves. That's unfortunate. Men are not so much caretaking as doing something to take their mind off what happened. And that's how they can get addicted to television, computer games, movies, sports, sex, food, drugs, sleep, not enough, too much. So we've really got some differences to pay attention to. What do women need to pay attention to? They need to take some constructive action, whether or not you feel like it. That means you get up in the morning and you do your exercises and you eat a good breakfast and you talk to yourself and get on moving with life. Males need to learn how to talk. They're never going to talk about something the way females do, but unless you can articulate what happened and how you feel to somebody you trust, whether that's a priest or a clergyman or your doctor or your best friend or your spouse or somebody, you need to get it out of your head in front of you, because it's probably not going to resolve on its own. Just going to bang around in your head and develop that slush fund. The Kubler-Ross Model, and I'm sure you've heard of this, it's been landmark, but it works for people who are facing their own death, which we are all going to do at some point in life, barring some miracle. We're all going to die because we've all been born. And once you get that, then you live every day as if it's your last, planning to live for another, 122 years. But it doesn't work for survivors. It works for the person who's been given a terminal illness diagnosis or something like that, but not for survivors. There's a huge difference. So you can go to my website and you can look up under articles the Grief Recovery Pyramid, which is how a survivor can learn to recover from a loss. And there's some strategies, and you sort of move around the pyramid, and eventually you retain your memory and there's no sting of the pain. The type of loss that causes most people the most trouble is suicide. As I mentioned earlier, we've gotten some wonderful research about suicide, and I brought a few slides to go over with you. Cornelius van Heeringen in the Netherlands has been doing some wonderful research, and he says that suicide may be a unique entity. Somebody said to me, why doesn't he say suicide is a unique entity? I said, because it involves the brain. And it's hard to say always and never with the brain. And this entity reflects the culmination of several complex processes that includes at least these 5 things: depression, impulsivity, disinhibition, anxiety, and executive function dysregulation. What does that mean? It means that they're sad about something. Impulsivity in the prefrontal cortex here behind your forehead. There are some executive functions that are designed to help you live life. One of them is that you put a check on impulsivity. Meaning somebody gives you a 5-pound box of chocolates and you start eating 1 and 2 and 3 and there's no check on your impulse, and pretty soon you've eaten 5 pounds of chocolate, which has put 15 pounds on you, and then you're sad about that. Disinhibition means the inhibitory impulse. You know, I'm really ticked at that guy. I think I'll go over and punch him in the nose. Well, ordinarily, the average brain will say, now wait a minute, do you really want to do that? Because if you bust his nose, there's going to be a problem. You might even get arrested. Are you sure you want to go down that route? Well, with suicide, that doesn't seem to work anymore. Anxiety, which is a form of fear, and executive function dysregulation, meaning they make unfortunate choices because of all this stuff that's going on. They don't really look at things carefully and make a good choice for themselves. Candace Pert, featured in the documentary What the Bleep, and if you have never seen What the Bleep, I think you can pick one up off Amazon.com. She was an amazing researcher. She was the first, she and her team, to discover opiate receptors in the brain, which changed the way that we look at addictive behaviors. She was very clear. When in the grip of a strong emotion, the brain is in an altered state. It's in an altered state even when you're euphoric. But it's especially true when the protective emotions of anger, fear, and sadness are involved. And you know that these are all positive emotions. There are no negative emotions. None. I'm sure you learned that growing up, right? No. 4 core emotions: joy, anger, fear, and sadness. They're all positive. They're all given to us to help us manage specific types of events in life. It's the behaviors that people exhibit around them that are negative. So let's quickly go through this process so you get some sense of how the brain gets altered. When the brain perceives a stressor, so any brain that's ever committed suicide, as far as we know, had some stressor in life. And it often started out with a loss, with sadness, that turned into depression, and depression itself is a stressor. It's down at the bottom of the emotions staircase. Corticotropin releasing factor, CRF, and what's interesting about this is it's both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. When I say that, do you have a picture in your brain of what that means? Up and down means yes.
No.
Okay. I love it when people are honest. So give me an example of hormone.
Testosterone.
Testosterone, excellent. Do women have any testosterone in their body?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, well, how much do I have compared to Greg M? Not much. Not much. He's got at least 20 times more than I do. And if he was a baseball or a basketball player, and in the middle of a competitive game, I like to watch Steph Curry personally, he might have 40 times more than I do. We all have the same types of hormones, males and females, but the levels are different. So something that's a hormone is going to impact every cell in your body. Just a little nano piece of a drop. Very powerful. It's also a neurotransmitter. What's a neurotransmitter?
Message sender.
Good. It sends the message across the synapse from one neuron to another. And that's all thinking is. A message from neuron to neuron to neuron. So when you have something that's both, plan that that means every cell in your brain and body is going to be hit. It's like multiple atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, whatever. So as soon as the brain perceives a stressor, and that is up here in this third layer, especially the functions behind your forehead here, I think this is a stressor. I just blew out my 2 front tires. Oh boy. As soon as that's released, then it goes throughout the brain and body, alerting every cell in the body. High levels of this really, really powerful substance have been found in the cerebral spinal fluid of people who are diagnosed with, or not even diagnosed, they're just in the throes of major depression. And anyone who has committed suicide that's been tested, high levels of CRF. The brain's in an altered state. And the research seems to suggest that people who actually kill themselves, it's probably really related to a profound major depression that may or may not have even been recognized. CRF is so powerful, I want to just give you a few examples. It can suppress appetite. So some people, when they're going through a loss, don't want to eat. Nothing tastes good. There are a few people who overeat. They're looking at it now in terms of anorexia nervosa. Because maybe they're thinking the fact that they don't eat is because they're so stressed that they've got all this CRF. It can increase subjective anxiety. Remember, anxiety is a type of fear. And so it can make the person personally more fearful about lots of things. It's linked with euphoric feelings that accompany alcoholism. People often say to me, they know the consequences of all this drinking. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is your first sip of alcohol, because it is a toxin to the brain, actually releases CRF. And because it's a toxin to the brain, one of the things CRF does momentarily is to make you feel better. It only lasts a little while. And there's not a brain on this planet that's ever been found that knows when you reach the point at which the euphoria leaves and now all the other stuff occurs. But for some people, that's why it's so difficult for them to stop using alcohol. It triggers inflammation, and multiple sclerosis is being looked at in terms of CRF as the underlying inflammatory process that triggers the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. So if you can get to people during a major stressor, and here's some research that shows people diagnosed with multiple sclerosis have had a major stressor in their life, approximately 2 or 2.5 years before their diagnosis. So if people could recognize that and help them deal with it, it's possible that that might have an impact on the development of the disease. And as we mentioned, high levels in brains of people who are really depressed or who committed suicide. One of the ways the brain can be altered is an increase in the levels of cortisol, which is another powerful substance in the body. We need it. If you don't have enough, you're going to have thyroid problems in all likelihood. And it's related, it's linked with the fight or flight response. You can stand up and set your boundaries or run away, one or the other. Elevated 24-hour urinary cortisol production was found in patients who recently attempted suicide, but not in the cerebrospinal fluid of people with depression who did not have suicidal thoughts or try to commit suicide. So there's your second way the brain can be altered. Third, serotonin, another neurotransmitter. It regulates mood, how well you sleep, and how your digestive system functions. I'm sure you remember from past times we've talked together that you probably have as many neurons in your gastrointestinal system as are in your brain. Those neurons look just like the ones in your brain, function the same way. But no wonder when you get upset, you get a stomach ache, or you get constipated, or you have diarrhea, or something like that. The serotonin is produced down here in the reptilian layer in a group of cells, and then it's dispersed from there. Some of it goes up to this first brain layer, third brain layer actually, the one on top, and the rest of it goes to your gut. You only have 10% in your brain, 90% of it is in your gut. Abnormal levels, whether there's too much serotonin or too little serotonin, are associated with depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, alcoholism, and suicidal tendency. And in people who commit suicide, it appears that there was enough serotonin, but for some reason, not enough got sent from the reptilian layer up through the mammalian layer to the neocortex, especially in the prefrontal cortex. So there was enough, but for some reason it's not getting sent up there. And that's going to impact their mood. Cholesterol. We need some cholesterol. There's actually some people who are concerned about what is happening to the American population with all of the anti-cholesterol medications that are being prescribed, especially in women, because most of the studies have been done on men, not on women. And we have a different physiology in some respects. We were talking to one of the researchers a year or two ago, and we were talking about cholesterol, and we said to him, "You've done a lot of cholesterol studies. Who's your population group for testing?" Every one of them were males. And I said, all of your studies have been done on males, but females are getting the same prescription as males, so how do we know that that works for the female body? "Oh, well," the researcher says, "we can't do it on women." I said, "Really?" And the reason would be, well, they have too many hormonal changes during the month. I mean, we can't do it on people who menstruate. And I said, well, then how do you know what to give them? Because maybe what you're giving them isn't going to work for the female brain and body. I was not popular. So what do we need cholesterol for? To synthesize cortisol, the major stress hormone. Some of the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone stuff, certainly vitamin D, and your memory. Don't have enough cholesterol, you're going to have memory problems. Decreased levels of cholesterol can create an altered brain state and have been linked with increased suicide rate, whether or not the decrease was spontaneous, just by the way they altered what they ate, for example, or due to drugs. So I think some of this needs to be taken another look at. Norepinephrine, here we go, like CRF, both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. It's also connected with fight-flight. It increases restlessness and anxiety. Elevated levels of norepinephrine inhibit activity in the prefrontal cortex. This is where your executive functions are. Now you've got lots of norepinephrine. Now you're not thinking clearly. You're not making good decisions. Your inhibition is not kicking in, and so on. Elevated levels of norepinephrine have been linked with an increased risk for suicidal behavior. So when you hear that somebody committed suicide, it's not simple. They didn't just get up one morning and look in the mirror and go, you know, I don't look, this is a bad hair day, I think I'll kill myself. No, that's not what happens. The brain's in an altered state. And you'll hear sometimes on news about a teenager that committed suicide. Give yourself a few weeks, and what's the news going to start reporting? Copycat suicides. So my guess is that group were already depressed. Now the suicide of somebody that they knew further kicked in, further altered their brain, and here they go. Let's finish up with this, because I think this is good news. Paul Pearsall, doing a lot of cellular memory, a form of epigenetics research. This is what he said. Once two systems come in energetic contact, they are connected forever by the infinite cellular memory of their connection. What does it mean to come in energetic contact? It means you know them, you interact with them. Our experiences with parents, siblings, children, and others close to us remain within us. Cellular memory is a form of energy. As with matter, energy is not destroyed. So information stored at the cellular level is retained indefinitely, meaning that you get cellular memory, we believe, from the past 3 or 4 generations, and you can pass it on to 3 or 4 generations subsequently. And where is it in the cells? This is a cell, and here's a drawing of the nucleus, and you can see the double helix here, which contains the chromosomes and the genes. 99% of all the DNA in your brain and body is right here on the chromosomes. But there's some protein strands here that nobody was sure what they were for. And it looks like memories, cellular memory, is housed on these protein strands. So I tell people, especially with the death of a person that you've loved, the tendency is for us to think about that person in absence. They're not here anymore. They're not at the table. I can't hug them anymore. I can't email them anymore. I can't call them on the phone anymore. Okay, you can't. But you carry them with you as long as you live in all of those memories that are believed filed on those protein strands. So when I think about the people in my life who have died, that I was really, really close to, and that would be my maternal grandmother, my mother's older sister, my father, a couple of really, really good friends, one who died in the AIDS epidemic. I got them right here. They're with me all the time. And if you can picture that, and even though they're not tangibly present, they're within you, then hopefully that can help you stop thinking of them only in absence. So you have a choice. 2 choices, that's all. You give your brain only 2 choices at a time because you only have 2 hemispheres. So you can stay stuck. Concentrate on the loss, especially if it's a loved one in absence. Likely that's going to increase your risk for illness, disease, can even shorten your life. That's one choice. And the other choice is to work the process. Identify the loss, go through recovery. Live a life that would honor the person who has died. Somebody said to me the other day, well, I'm sure that he's up there looking at me and realizing how much I loved him because my life is just in the toilet. I said, well, if you believe he's up there looking at you, what do you suppose he thinks when sees you living a life that's in the toilet? Is that honoring his memory? I don't think so. A life well lived, especially if you can do something to honor that person, like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. That's because her son was killed by someone who was drunk. To me, that's how you honor the person, not sitting in a corner crying and checking out a life. So this is my bottom line. Waste no time in mindless grieving because it is over. And somebody say, oh, my dog died, 17 years old. I can't believe it. I said, 17? Wow, you must have taken really good care of that dog. A lot of them don't live to be 17. Oh, I know, but if I'd known it was going to die, I never would have got one. People are so interesting. Waste no time in mindless grieving because it is over. Yes, go through the process, but move on. Rejoice and give thanks that it happened at all, that your paths even crossed. It's amazing the people that we can meet in our lives, and I don't know if that was I don't know how that happened. Sometimes I make just a sudden decision and I meet somebody that, boy, I can really learn something from. Or they're in my life for a reason, for a while, or a season, or sometimes for a lifetime. Had 2 of them die not too long ago. One woman who was a marvelous mentor, she was 92. I am so grateful that our paths crossed. I have to be thankful for that. So there's more information on my website. I encourage you, if you have something to grieve, and if you don't now, you will, go through the process. It'll make a difference in the rest of your life.